Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, Armstrong Economics founder Martin Armstrong ponders how the markets might be affected by the Ukraine crisis and panic cycles. Jack Crooks from Black Swan Capital says Russia's attempted Ukrainian land grab has currency traders on edge. We talk to Martin Armstrong right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Sitting in for Phil Mackesy, here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Martin Armstrong, founder of ArmstrongEconomics.com. Welcome to the show, Martin.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Well, one of the first things I have to do is congratulate your prediction that Russia would make an incursion into the Ukraine after the Olympics. You made that prediction several months ago. You've been bang on so far. What's going to happen after this?
Well, right now, we have very good sources there. So, actually, we also reported that Yanukovych had a heart attack the night before. The ultimatum was you surrender or we're attacking. And then suddenly Putin backed off. But the information we got was that Yanukovych suffered a heart attack that night. And initially the first reports were they thought perhaps he died. Well, now we're getting reports that no, he did have a heart attack, but he's now in a Moscow hospital. So, either way, it's difficult for Russia to really continue to push on if they don't really have somebody to put on what they perceive as the throne of Ukraine.
Sure, a puppet.
So, it is the whole thing is an interesting dilemma because primarily all the gas lines to Europe from Russia go through Ukraine. So that's why it's so important to them. And also what, has been going on in Syria. The U.S. stands up and says, oh, he's a dictator and he's gassing his people. And they could care less, honestly. And what it was really all about was simply that Saudi Arabia has been wanted to put a gas pipeline through Syria to get it to Europe to compete with Russia. And that's all this has been about. And so Russia basically was supporting Syria, and that's why they came out so strong on that issue, because it's all just a joke. The whole thing is a joke. Nobody really cares about human rights or all the rest of this stuff. They can pound their chest all they want. But, I mean, in the U.S., the police confiscate guns and, we gotta get guns off the streets to save people's lives and all this other kind of stuff. Then the police resell them. So, then they say, we need the money to support our departments.
What about Putin being nominated for a peace prize, the Nobel Peace Prize?
Look, most of what you see, is I personally think it's largely something to really just calm the masses around. And the biggest problem with Putin is that he is of the old school mentality. And by that I mean that he perceives that Russia's demise as far as territory is concerned was the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. Now, he is still in this old world thinking that you need empire. And the bigger you are, the more powerful you are, and you'll be more respected. And honestly, the economist that a lot of the socialists hate was Adam Smith. And he said, no, all this is nonsense, and basically the wealth of a nation is its total productivity. And effectively, Japan proved that. Japan rose to the second largest economy in the world, a tiny little island with hardly any natural resources. So, they proved effectively, that is the productivity of a nation that matters. And it's not the size. Canada is actually bigger than the United States. Australia is about the size of the United States. So size isn't indicative of the size of the economy or anything else. It is also the stark difference why we see China rising and will become the largest economy in the world, because effectively they're not caught up in the Russian syndrome. They didn't lose any territory, so they understand the game, and they are out there to compete and grow their economy. Russia, rather than growing its economy, is more concerned about, empire again. So it's a completely different psychology. And Russia never accomplished what China did. When you go to Moscow, yes, you see, okay, it looks like capitalism on the surface. But basically you went from government ownership to oligarchy ownership. And you still don't see really entrepreneurship. All the restaurants in Moscow, yeah, they're very big. They're all oligarchy. And that's it. And what happens is if you went there to try and open up a restaurant, forget it. I mean, you'd be threatened, killed, or put off in some, back alley. So they don't, tolerate competition at all. And in Ukraine, this was the same thing that was going on. And why I've argued on our site, because largely, you have these people saying, oh, it was a CIA plot. I mean, it's all nonsense. And, plots and coups and things of this nature you have leaders, and they're a small group. You never get the grassroots. A revolution is grassroots. And it's indicative of like the Russian Revolution, French, American, English, etc. That comes from the people. And when it does, it's against government. And what's effectively also going on in Ukraine is that this is why there's no real leaders emerging, because the people are so fed up with politicians, and that nobody who's ever been in government is being trusted at all. So, I mean, even though the woman they wanted out of prison, fine, okay, you shouldn't be in prison. We're not interested in you being a leader. Go.
Well, I noticed she was wearing a Soviet-style uniform jacket. That probably doesn't make her the most popular person on Earth.
Well, it's not even so much that as it is the fact that they don't trust anybody. And Yanukovych has had accounts everywhere, in England, in Poland, in Austria, in Switzerland, Germany. I mean, they're all now coming forward. Oh, well, yeah, he's got money here. I mean, the guy just ripped off the entire country, and he's probably, I would say, far worse than the Marcos of the Philippines was. So,
how many pairs of shoes does his wife have?
I don't know. I think it's a question of how many wives he has.
Well, I mean, I don't know what kind of a salary he made as president, but
it was supposed to be 2,000 euros a month.
I said something like that to somebody, so that's probably about $3,000. Pretty modest pay, and yet somehow he's, built a $500 million estate.
Oh, that's not. There's over $2 billion sitting in Switzerland that I know of.
Oh,
cash.
Well, I guess we know who's sponsoring the next party.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's his sons basically adopted, they became the criminals, which is why they also left. They were doing the same thing as the oligarchs in Russia, and they were, the difference between Ukraine and Russia was that you actually had small shops and entrepreneurship. So his two sons were going around extorting everybody, just like the mafia. Well, you pay us protection money. And so, this is what was really going on in Ukraine, and the press doesn't necessarily tell the truth in the West. So, but this is it, and this is we have Ukrainian staff ourselves, so we have and always had very good contacts in that area. So it's just simply the way it is, and knowing also what Putin's ideas are, and even though one of his, basically he was a godfather to somebody. So I know an awful lot of people over there.
So you've got them stacked up like those little dolls, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. It's just the way things have developed over the years, that we created this model and everybody wanted to know what it was, what the computer was forecasting. And so basically everybody kind of realized that it's a major contribution effort. So, they would give us information what's going on really in one country. In return, they want the truth of what's going on someplace else. So, and then you have political problems, what can be said publicly, etc. And the press is to a large extent is really dead in the West. It's not. That's why you have Snowden who leaking the NSA documents. Where did he go? He had to go to Britain. There was no American newspaper that would have published that. None. Not the New York Times, not the Washington Post. And then when it does come out, they go, "Oh my God," and pretend it was shocking to them. I mean, I can tell you personally, and I swear on my soul, for the last 3 years, when I talk to people in Congress, they were telling me, "Be careful what you send us in emails because the NSA's sucking up everything." I said, "Even yours?" And they said, "Yes." Now, it was not told to me like in some sort of secret meeting, like don't repeat this or something like that. It was very nonchalant. So if I was being told, as a matter of fact, this is what's going on, you can guarantee that every journalist covering Capitol Hill also knew and didn't publish. So it was no secret.
Well, I've known since the 80s that any long-distance call that goes on satellite is monitored. And I thought that was well known, but
this is everything. There isn't anything these people have not been sucking up. And they have lied so much to Congress. I mean, I don't know. If you did that, you'd be in jail for the rest of your life. I mean, it's a felony to lie to Congress, but yet they do it nonchalantly. So.
Well, every American politician swears an oath to uphold the Constitution, don't they?
Sure they do, as well as the bureaucrats. But, there's a separate law, and you don't have to swear the oath to it to uphold the Constitution, but to testify before Congress, and I have testified before Congress, you have to basically realize that anything you say that's false can be then brought as perjury charges against you or held in contempt.
Martin, one interesting thing, a difference in Canadian law and U.S. law. In U.S. law, if you're on a stand and compelled to testify, you can take the fifth and refuse to say anything because you could incriminate yourself. In Canada, you can't incriminate yourself if you're giving sworn testimony at a public hearing. You can say...
and we don't even... Although we have the Fifth Amendment, they don't really honor it in the United States.
But here, they can't use information that you give to a public hearing against you. The feeling in Canada is we want to get to the bottom of it. An individual may have committed offenses, but it's more important to find out, who stole the horses, who took the gold.
No, it's in the United States, it's the opposite. You have too many. It is not one government. It is at least 3 branches, if not 4, and they all have their own self-interests.
We'll have more with Martin Armstrong next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. More and more people are looking to the Internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Martin Armstrong, founder of ArmstrongEconomics.com. Well, one of the things you mentioned in your newsletter was panic cycles. So these aren't your regular, normal cycles. We do things out of panic?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we tend to like to think that we are in control of ourselves. But we're not in many respects. Yes, you have individualism. However, we also act as a herd. And I would recommend, if you would like to catch a glimpse of this, there was a book written by a researcher after World War II, Stanley Milgram. It was called Obedience to Authority. And effectively it was about, people were saying, well, gee, how could the Germans just kill all those Jews? And so, with that, in cold blood like that. And then the debate became, oh, well, they were just German and Germans are different. So Stanley Milgram, who was Jewish, decided that he would try to verify this. And he took people in Connecticut right off the street, and he put an actor in a room and said, here's some questions, you can answer him. The actor was all wired up, and every time he gets an answer wrong, just give him an increasing electric shock, but don't pass this one particular line because you might kill him. And just average people off the street, and they kept doing it, and the actor's screaming, oh my God, stop please, and I'm sorry, I gotta do this. And he ended up calling it obedience to authority. And then people say, oh, this is ridiculous, and then he conducted it in many different cities with the same result. Some of his experiments are very, very fascinating. He would take, and you could probably see this yourself, why do people, we call it rubbernecking, you get traffic jams. If there's an accident, suddenly the road on the opposite side will slow down to look. And we call it rubbernecking. He basically took one person, put him out on the street, staring up in the middle of the sky at absolutely nothing. People walk by, just look at him and think he's crazy. Put 5 people out there doing it, all of a sudden you'll get a crowd. Everybody will stop to look to see what it is that these people are looking at. And we are actually conditioned as a herd. And this is how markets function. As long as the majority are buying, then people are bullish. And
that must be why in ads they say America's #1 selling car for the last 8 years. I mean,
oh yeah.
Obviously if it's #1, it's got to be good.
Mm-hmm. And this is why markets crash. This is, when I've been called into, by different governments for all this, every time something collapses, I didn't want to I got sick and tired of it, like for the 87 crash, and they kept lobbying me to try and get involved. And I said, why? You people never listen anyhow. And so I finally went in, and the first thing out of their mouth is, we're going to find out the person that overpowered this market and forced it to crash. And I asked them, I said, okay, fine. I said, every investigation since 1907 has started with the same nonsense. You've never found anybody once. This mythical short player, and Europe is actually going to outlaw short selling now. And you'll see the market will go down more without short selling, because they're the only people that buy in the middle of a panic. So I asked him, I said, okay, fine, you've never found anybody. And he says, oh, well, I said, do you understand how the market even functions? And he says, oh, well, the short player basically borrows stock from this guy and he sells it to the other guy. I said, okay, fine. So how can there be somebody that overpowers the market that outnumbers them? I said, let's talk about futures. Every futures contract has to be matched. So there has to be a buyer and a seller. And he's kind of looking at me. I said, so where are you talking about you're going to find somebody that has a huge position that nobody else has? I said, there's got to be somebody on the other side. So he just looks at me and he says, well, why does it crash? I said, very simple. You get 90% of the people, everybody that has ever bought has bought. Something comes out, scares them, they then panic, they then try to sell, and guess what? There's no bid. So you get a flash crash. And that's what causes a market to collapse. The majority is always wrong. And it needs to be wrong because that is the actual fuel that makes markets move. You get everybody panicking at the bottom. And just look at gold recently. Going into the end of the year, oh, that's it. It's going to go to $600. It's the end, whatever. It goes up. Why? Because virtually every analyst out there from Goldman Sachs on down and every newspaper said gold's dead. That's it. Over with. At the peak, this is it. We're going to take off. It's going to be $30,000. It's hyperinflation. Everybody runs out and buys and they lose their shirt. That's the way it is. You have to get the majority on either side to reverse the market because that is the mechanism by which it works. Everybody's long, they panic, they sell, gold goes down. At the low, everybody's starting to sell because they think it will never go up again, and then it rallies. So it always moves against the majority. And that's how the market functions. So there's certain periods in time where we tend to panic. And our computer monitors that, and they can be indicative, largely percentage movements, etc. So this is what we call a panic cycle rather than simply a normal high or low. It's when everybody gets all active. And it's usually not I would say, isolated type thing. They tend to they'll show up in many markets at the same time. And that is indicative of an external source rather than, an internal fundamental, which again is what a lot of people, invest on based upon some fundamental reasoning, and it just doesn't ever materialize that way.
Why do we insist on buying shares when they're at their peak?
Because people then are anticipating, well, gee, it went up 10% for the last 5 years, so it's going to do it again. We tend to think, and this is the same thing with global warming nonsense. You have people coming out, oh, global warming. Well, now they came out and said, oh, well, okay, this is the coldest year in I think in my lifetime.
In 30 years, pretty well.
And so now they came out and said, well, it's a pause in global warming. Oh, are you saying a pause? So maybe, basically you're saying, what, there's a cycle? They don't really quite get it, but their forecasts are always, well, it went up 2 degrees this year, so therefore, within the next 30 years, this is where it's going to be, and oh my God, the world's going to end. They assume whatever trend is in motion will stay in motion, and that is applicable not only to global warming, but to markets. It's human nature. And I was giving a lecture in Tokyo, and it was just for institutions, and this rich individual bribed his way through the hotel to get in. And he came in and he says, I just have to talk to you. I said, what's the problem? And he had bought $50 million in Japanese stock the very last day of the rally, the day of the high. And what I found fascinating, the guy was in his 60s. It was the first time he ever invested in the stock market. And now I'm like, what? You bought $50 million on the high. And I said, what made you do this? And he said, for 7 years, brokers had called him, and every January the Nikkei had gone up 5%. So he watched for 7 years. And 7 years, every January it went up. So he finally, December 1989, put in $50 million expecting to make that 5%. And market crashed. That was the high. So, that's part of human nature. You have to see something perform before you're going to get the confidence to do it. And that is why markets peak, and that's why they collapse. When you sucked in that guy for $50 million on the day of the high, you've got nobody else left to keep it going. Everybody who ever thought about buying has bought.
That's amazing, though. It's like going into a gambling casino the first time and putting $50 million down on red or whatever. You'd have a better
he watched
shot.
for 7 years, is what he told me.
Oh, well. That's a very interesting story. What can we do as investors, then, to try to keep our heads when everybody else is losing theirs?
I think that the primary thing is that you have to be careful with the fundamental analysis, but and largely understand that this is a cyclical event. It always is. And to get a bull market going, everybody has to turn bullish, and it will gradually build up. And you can go to our site. We call it a phase transition. Take gold going into 1980. It dropped in 1976 to $100. It struggled, finally reaching $400 in December 1979. All right. Then the last 4 weeks, it goes from 400 to 875. We call that a phase transition. So suddenly what happens is at the last end, everybody says, all right, I guess they're right, and I'm just going to buy. And you get this blast up of this final doubling of the market, and it's usually within the shortest amount of time. So that's what you have to pay attention to. When you see something double in price in like less than 3 months, it's not the beginning of a trend, it's usually the end of the trend. And trends begin typically very quietly. And it's usually everybody talking in the opposite direction, and then you'll get, they're talking about it always going up, and then it crashes, or at the lows, this is it, forget it, never buy it again, it's over with. And that's usually the opposite. So it's just very interesting. And you have to also understand the psychology of the market changes, and it's important. So when I was doing research on for a book I published back in '86 on the markets, I had to go through and read all the newspapers. And it became interesting. You read the newspapers prior to 1929, and the fundamental analysis was different. Interest rates went up. It was a reason to buy markets. And you listen to it, it's actually logical. If interest rates were rising, it's because people were bidding for more and more money. And that means they're bullish, economy's still expanding, etc. Governments get it completely wrong. They keep lowering and lowering interest rates, and what happens is that as long as rates keep going, people aren't going to borrow because it will be cheaper if I wait. Only when they start seeing rates begin to rise do they rush out, start buying property, etc. I better hurry up before the rates rise faster. And so they respond to the trend. I mean, they've lowered interest rates to virtually zero for 26 years in Japan, and it hasn't really reversed anything. And the same thing in the United States or Europe for that matter. I mean, it's just, they get it wrong. You want to see the economy turn up, interest rates have to turn up.
Well, you have to encourage saving. Right now, you might as well bury it in the backyard.
Well, now what you're getting into is the stock markets are going to move much higher, largely because capital has no other choice. It can't earn any money in the bank. Interest rates pay virtually nothing. And so people cannot survive largely for the future. They're going to have to rely upon higher dividends out of stocks than you can get in a bank and capital gains on the stocks. So this is why the stock market's been going good. And one of the reasons they said, gee, the stock market rallied with the Ukrainian thing. Well, you have two impacts. One is you have the fact that people need money to actually earn for pension funds, etc. But the other thing is that wars are major movers of capital. And the U.S. was bankrupt in 1896. That's when J.P. Morgan had to lend $100 million in gold to bail out the U.S. Treasury. By the end of World War I, the U.S. had the largest gold supply, going from bankruptcy in 1896. And by the end of World War II, it had 76% of the entire world gold reserves. Why? Because Europe blew itself apart. All the capital came to America, and that's what made the dollar what it is. That's it. Before then, the United States was just a 40% employment in agriculture. They were mostly just farmers tilling soil. That was it.
We're sheep when it comes to investing.
Unfortunately, yes. So, I mean, but if you understand how things function, then you can make a logical decision and, leave the herd at times and understand, but take it like a herd of zebra. The ones on the fringe see a lion approaching, they panic, they start to run. The rest of the herd didn't see anything. All right? But they're running, so they start running. Everybody's running, and if they could talk, you'd say, well, why are you running? I don't know, because he is. And that's basically it. We are still biological life forms, and we still panic, and we all still run together. They don't know why. He's running, so it must be something.
Well, thank you very much, Martin, for talking with us. Is there a website that people could go and explore?
Yes, just go to armstrongeconomics.com.
After the break, Jack Crooks on This Week in Money.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
My guest is Jack Crooks from Black Swan Capital. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for having me again. I appreciate it.
Well, the whole world is watching, as they say, what's happening in the Ukraine. How's that going to affect currency markets?
So far it hasn't had a huge impact. I would have expected more, given all the talk and all the the hand-wringing going on. I think it's generally been a little positive for the euro. Seeing a little bit of flight back into the euro, but aren't seeing too much of an impact other places. In fact, I would have expected it to be fairly negative for some of the growth currencies, the commodity currencies out there, given that potential impact. But as of yet, we haven't seen too much other than just a little bit of strength in the euro. And as I said, I think it's been playing a safe haven role in Europe at the moment.
Right. So the Ukraine isn't having the big impact that we thought it would. What is influencing the currency markets then right now?
Yeah, I'm not saying that it won't have a much bigger impact, and it may. Obviously, if Russia decides to, move in with force, and anything can happen here. There's so many balls in the air that could change the dynamics. And just to further that point, if they do go in and we see a real crisis develop, you got to think that it will start to have maybe even a negative impact on the European currency longer term. And I say that because of the fact that Germany, which obviously is the driver of the Eurozone, does a lot of business with Russia. And if obviously if Russia responds by cutting off gas, if the sanctions are put up and German business doesn't get the flow that it does now from Russia, that could change the dynamics on the euro as safe haven very, very quickly. Just to extend that thought. So the game is the jury's still out, so to speak, on that.
And the Russians have pulled the plug before in the past in a price dispute with the Ukraine. They cut off the Ukraine's natural gas for 3 months in the middle of winter a few years ago. So
that's right.
It's not like they won't do it.
No, you're exactly right. Russia's going to play hardball here. And I'm not sure that the West has a lot of leverage. And the point is, the West making a lot of threats, and I should say mostly the U.S. war hawks are making the threats, and NATO, which I think is a mistake to try and move NATO this close anyway to the Russian borders, but that's a whole new story. But I think if that happens, we'll see. Russia will act. They won't talk. And, as you said, that could lead to shutting off the gas and a lot of other things that are brewing out there.
Of course, Russia is relying on that gas to power its economy. It doesn't have much more than energy going for it.
That's true. Their economy basically has become a giant energy platform. But on that note, it's been a pretty good platform for them, and they are making strides in, improving the financial strength of the economy, which was devastated, after the privatization. So they are moving along, and the demand from China for their gas, Kazakhstan especially, which is China relations and pipeline related activities, also the natural resources in Siberia. China's going to just keep taking that stuff, and that's one of the other strategic concerns. If the West continues to demonize Putin here and push further and further, and attempt to push further and further into Russia's buffer zone, so to speak, I think they're going to push Russia closer and closer to China, which globally / strategically is a big mistake. And I don't think Russia's going to be hurt that badly if U.S. starts to move gas to Europe and natural gas to Europe. Russia will just turn the spigots on more and more for China. So they do have I think they have more advantages here than the West does in this game at the moment.
Obama went and froze Russia's assets in the United States. Do they hold a lot of assets there?
I would imagine most of because they know the way the U.S. has turned into, the battering ram through NATO, as I said, and I'm sure that the wealthy players in Russia didn't want to be exposed to the U.S. financial system, and probably, as I said, have that money in Europe and Cyprus and other places.
So he probably seized an old Lada dealership or something like that.
Yeah, I mean it's just I think these are silly things to do, given the provocation. I think to a large degree, if you look at it from Russia's side, I think they have a legitimate gripe here. But that never seems to stop, as I said, the U.S. War Party from doing what they want to do.
More with Jack Crooks next on This Week in Money.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Jack Crooks from Black Swan Capital. Jack, you're saying the situation in Ukraine could become very ugly very quickly. Is resistance futile in this case? Should we just let the Russians do whatever they want to do?
I think there's some type of happy medium. There's obviously, concern, and you have to be concerned. Russia, just unilaterally comes in and grabs the country. But same token, you have to also be, I think, sympathetic to Russia's needs. I mean, Ukraine historically has been seen as their territory. The West keeps encroaching further and further into what's referred to as Russia's buffer zone. So when you think about it, since World War II, they've moved back from basically the center of Germany, 1,000 miles east, and Ukraine is a key buffer zone for them, with a strategic, access on the Black Sea, which can get them into the Mediterranean. So they're not going to give up Ukraine in just, some willy-nilly fashion. And they will fight to hold it and keep it from falling into becoming a NATO country. And I don't think, in terms of just pure military firepower, Russia is still the world's strongest land-based power. NATO and the West don't have the firepower to back up, what they're saying. And the other point is that it's really from the U.S. standpoint, there's no really major vital interest here for the U.S. And it's just one of those situations. Why do we keep antagonizing Putin when the best methodology would be to try and pull him further into the European orbit instead of push him away? And that's what I'm afraid may happen here. And the consequences will be bad, as they usually are when we try and start a war that we can't finish.
Yeah, the U.S. seems to have a habit of doing that. If they want closer relations with Putin, maybe they have to call Matthew McConaughey in, with both of them being men who like to run around a lot without shirts on.
that might be perfect. But and as I said, Putin isn't a nice guy either. But same token, the constant Western demonization of Putin, I don't think creates the backdrop for broader cooperation. That's for sure.
If a person was going to hedge their bets in the currency markets, then what would you do?
I think you got to be concerned about the impact on Germany, as I said. And to me, that's why I think you have to probably split your bets, and have some money in the U.S. for, I think it will be the ultimate safe haven if this thing blows up, because you'll see money move back into the U.S. Treasury bonds, a lot of the international money. So I think that's the place probably to be. Maybe even Japan as a bit of a safe haven, because if the stock markets get hit on some type of conflagration here, you're also going to see the Japanese yen tend to rally. It plays its own safe haven role lately, and I think that will continue if we see turmoil. So I think the U.S. dollar and the Japanese yen would be places to be if this thing starts to blow up.
What about countries neighboring Ukraine and Russia?
These countries, they're basically still emerging market currency, so to speak, given the way that they trade. But even there, I've checked them this week, and they've been moving up, or haven't, I should say, doing well and remain supported even in this turmoil, along with the euro. But you're right. If this blows up, you're going to see probably those currencies, Hungary, Czech koruna, Polish zloty, that are traded and that can be traded by retail investors, get hit pretty hard. So that's something in terms of an opportunity that I've been watching.
If Russia is successful in taking over the eastern part of Ukraine, should people in Poland and the Czech Republic and the other former satellite nations of the Soviet Union be worried that maybe Putin might feel brave there as well?
Yeah, I think they have to be worried about it, because I think you're going to see naturally as Russia's military continues to strengthen, and they've gotten stronger and stronger, and Putin has made it pretty clear that they want to recapture some of these buffer zones. They're going to keep pushing west, and push, and ultimately, once they solve this Ukraine problem, which I think is going to be to Russia's benefit. You're going to see troops in Bulgaria, Ukraine, all the way up right on the border again with Poland, because I do think he's very, very serious about pushing further west and creating these zones for them. And it just goes historically, Russia's been attacked so many times, and they have no real natural physical barriers, that they're only, when they look at countries like this, and I keep saying buffer zones, as just pushing the enemy a little further away, because it's easy to come through that plain there, right through Poland, into St. Petersburg, and that's where a lot of the major battles historically have been fought, because Napoleon came through there, the Nazis, Germany came through there. So their history in and of itself forces them to be a little paranoid in terms of expanding their territory, and I think I think we're seeing Russia in the process, kind of the post-Cold War process of pushing further west again, and I do think that will continue, and those countries do have to be worried. Well,
that's not the best note to leave us, but on the other hand, reality does bite.
It does. Reality does bite, and that's exactly right. How much can the West do here on a relative basis? I guess we'll find out very shortly.
Jack, is there a website people can go to find out more of your thoughts on this?
Sure. It's blackswantrading.com, blackswantrading.com. And we've written some pieces on this, and matter of fact, put a piece up about how geography impacts this based on a book written by Robert Kaplan, The Revenge of Geography, which is something I'd recommend to everybody listening if they want to get a better understanding of, kind of Russia's view of this from a historical geographic standpoint, how it plays into their mindset strategically. So I think it's a great book, and we've summarized some of that. They can find that there.
Thanks to our guests, Martin Armstrong and Jack Crooks. And thank you for listening. We're back next week with more This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard.
This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.